I was 22 the first time my father publicly humiliated me for my job. My name's Caleb, and at the time, I was working as a janitor at an office building downtown. Not exactly the dream job, but it was honest work. I took pride in it, too. I liked the quiet of the early mornings, the predictability of the routines, and the simple satisfaction of leaving things cleaner than I found them. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't directionless. I was saving money, slowly, methodically, and planning for something bigger, something no one in my family cared to ask about. But to my father, that job was the punchline to every joke, the mark of failure. My older brother, Mason, was already working at some financial firm by then, wearing suits and flashing his company credit card like it was a badge of honor. My sister, Leah, had married into money and spent her time curating a picture-perfect life on social media. They were the golden children, shiny, spotless, exactly the kind of people my dad liked to toast in front of company. That Thanksgiving was the first time I realized just how invisible I was to my own family. It was the usual big, extended gathering at my parents' house. Turkey roasting, kids screaming, wine flowing, and adults laughing louder than necessary. I'd shown up with a homemade pie and a six-pack, like I always did. And as usual, no one really acknowledged me beyond a distracted, "Hey, Caleb." Dinner was loud and chaotic, the way it always was, with my dad holding court at the head of the table like he was some kind of emperor. He'd always liked having an audience. And of course, he loved his little speeches. Every holiday, he'd raise his glass and toast to something. Family, health, the good old days. But this time, he went off script. To the kids who made something of themselves, he said, grinning at Mason and Leah. To hard work that actually leads somewhere. And to never ending up cleaning toilets for a living. I remember the pause after he said it. The way everyone chuckled nervously, glanced at me, then quickly looked away. Mason smirked and clinked his glass with Dad's. Leah pretended not to hear, but her husband let out a snort and muttered something under his breath. I didn't say anything. I didn't even finish my food. I stood up, quietly, left the pie on the counter, and walked out the front door. Nobody followed me. Nobody called. Not that night. Not the next day. That moment stuck with me like a shard of glass buried too deep to pull out. It wasn't just what he said, it was the way he said it. Like I was a disappointment he had to laugh off to make himself feel better. Like my life, my choices, my path were just garbage to be swept under the rug. But what they didn't know, what they never bothered to ask, was that the janitor job was never supposed to be the whole story. I had been working nights while taking online business courses. I was learning everything I could about commercial real estate, maintenance, building codes, contracts, zoning laws. Every paycheck I earned from scrubbing toilets and mopping floors went into a savings account that I treated like sacred ground. I had a goal, a timeline, a vision. I wasn't going to be a janitor forever. I just didn't feel the need to broadcast it. Over the years, I showed up to fewer and fewer family gatherings. The invites started feeling more like formalities anyway, mass texts with no warmth behind them. And I didn't mind. I was busy building something real. I bought my first small office building at 26. It was a rundown property near the industrial edge of town. Leaky pipes, outdated wiring, the whole 9 yards. But I fixed it. I managed to clean up myself. I put in new systems, got it up to code, brought in tenants, and within a year, I was already seeing a return. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. By the time I was 30, I owned 3 buildings and had just started my own property management company. I had a team, contractors I trusted, a lawyer on retainer, and a portfolio that was growing faster than I'd ever imagined. I still dressed simply. I didn't post about it. I wasn't trying to prove anything. But I never forgot that Thanksgiving toast. Not once. It wasn't until a couple years later that I saw him again in person. Not at a family event. Not at another holiday dinner. But sitting outside my office building. In the rain. In a wrinkled shirt. Holding a manila folder in his lap, like it contained the last scraps of his dignity. At first, I didn't recognize him. He'd aged badly. His hair was thinner, his posture hunched. The man who used to fill a room with his voice now looked small. He didn't see me approach, just kept staring at the glass doors like he was unsure if he should even go in. When he finally did look up, our eyes met. And the look on his face? It said everything. He knew. But before I say what he wanted, before I explain how it got to that point, you need to understand just how deep the rift in our family ran. How my father's ego, his pride, His need to humiliate and control tore through the years like a slow, burning fuse. Because that Thanksgiving toast was just the beginning. The real fallout started after that. One choice, one snub, one insult at a time, until it all came crumbling down. I didn't stop speaking to my family altogether after that Thanksgiving toast, but something in me shifted. I became quieter, more guarded. Phone calls felt more like obligations than conversations. I kept them short, polite, distant. My siblings didn't notice. My dad certainly didn't. And my mom, well, she never challenged him on anything. She had perfected the art of looking away. Over the next couple of years, the pattern only hardened. Every family gathering followed the same script. Mason would talk about his latest promotion or his new client bonuses, and Dad would nod with pride, throwing out lines like, "That's how you build a future," or, "Now that's a man with direction." Leah would flash photos of her kids in private school uniforms, her husband chiming in with stories about ski trips and backyard renovations. They'd all talk over each other like they were auditioning for the spotlight. And me? I'd just sit there, sipping water, answering direct questions with as few words as possible, waiting for an excuse to leave. The real breaking point didn't come all at once. It started with little things, tiny, cutting remarks Dad couldn't help but throw my way. "Still mopping floors, Caleb? You know, if you'd followed Mason's lead, you'd have a corner office by now. Don't worry, we all bloom in our own way. Some just take longer." He never asked what I was doing with my time. Never asked how my buildings were doing, or how my tenants were, or how I'd gone from one property to 3. And I never told him. It wasn't out of pride, it was out of exhaustion. Why share with people who only hear what they want to? Mom would try to smooth things over with tight smiles and weak chuckles, offering me extra pie or asking if I needed leftovers, as if that somehow made up for being treated like the family footnote. I might have let it all slide forever, honestly. I'd been conditioned since I was a teenager to just take the jabs, nod, and swallow my anger. But then came Leah's birthday dinner. She was turning 35, and her husband rented out a private dining room at one of those restaurants with more adjectives than ingredients on the menu. Everyone was dressed to impress. Leah in a gold wrap dress, Mason in a navy suit. Even Mom and Dad looked polished, like they were prepping for a photo shoot. I wore a clean button-down and slacks. Nothing flashy, just enough to look respectable. I wasn't interested in pretending. I wasn't there to perform. I had barely sat down when Dad gave me the once-over and smirked. "Didn't have time to change after work?" he asked, loud enough for the whole table to hear. I smiled tightly. "I don't mop floors anymore, Dad." Mason laughed into his wine. "What? You got promoted to head custodian." I ignored it. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction. But Leah was always sharper than she let on. "So what do you actually do, Caleb?" she asked sweetly, cutting her steak with surgical precision. "You're always so mysterious. You come and go, never post anything, don't show up to half the family stuff." I shrugged. "I've been busy." "Doing what?" Mason pressed. "I mean, it's fine if you're just keeping it simple. Not everyone wants the stress of a real career." And that's when Dad chimed in again, this time lifting his glass. "To Caleb," he said, the smirk returning. The most consistent one in the family. Still grounded. Still humble. Still underemployed. Everyone laughed. Even Mom, though she looked uncomfortable. It was like they couldn't help themselves. Like bullying me had become tradition. I stood up. Not dramatically. Just calmly. I looked at each of them in turn, and for the first time in years, I said exactly what I was thinking. "You know what's funny? You all talk so much, but none of you ever ask questions you actually want answers to." That shut them up. For a moment, at least. "I own 3 commercial properties," I continued. "I manage them myself. I built a company from the ground up with no loans, no help, and no handouts. I didn't tell you because I didn't need your approval. And I sure as hell didn't want your advice." I left my napkin on the table and walked out before anyone could speak. No yelling. No dramatics. Just quiet, clean detachment. For a week, I didn't hear from any of them. Then I got a text from Mom. "Maybe don't cause scenes at your sister's dinner." It was supposed to be a celebration. That was all she said. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just another slap wrapped in fake concern. So I stopped replying. Stopped showing up. I skipped the next Thanksgiving entirely. Went on a weekend trip to the mountains instead. Snow, silence, peace. It was the first holiday I actually enjoyed in years. But the silence from my family didn't last. 6 months later, Mason called me out of the blue. "Hey," he said, sounding unusually stiff. "I was wondering if you could meet for lunch. Somewhere quiet." I was suspicious immediately. Mason never wanted anything that didn't benefit him. "What's going on?" I asked. "It's about Dad," he said. He didn't want me to say anything, but he got let go. Company restructuring. He's having trouble finding new work. I blinked. That man had been bragging about his job security since I was a kid. "So," I said, "he's struggling, man. Mom's worried. He's not talking to anyone. Just sits around the house all day. He's applied to places, but no bites. It's been months." I could hear the hesitation in Mason's voice, the careful way he was building up to something. "He saw your name on a building downtown," he finally said. "One of your tenants mentioned you in passing." He was surprised. "And then he asked me if I thought you were hiring." I said nothing. "Look," Mason said, "I'm not saying you owe him anything, but maybe just talk to him. Even if it's not a job, maybe a reference or something. He's proud, okay? But he's scared too. I've never seen him like this." I agreed to meet. Not because I felt obligated, but because I wanted to look the man in the eye and see if he'd say it, to see if he could swallow even a fraction of his pride. That's how we ended up back at the start of this story. My father, sitting outside my office building, in the rain, holding a folder full of resumes for jobs he never thought he'd need. But before I tell you what happened when I let him in, what he said, and how I responded, you need to know what came before that. Because right after I walked out of Leah's birthday dinner, the real betrayal hadn't even happened yet. That came 2 weeks later, when I got a call from my property manager about a maintenance issue at my newest building, an issue that didn't make sense. A leaky pipe, a busted lock, a broken HVAC unit, all in 1 week. Things that had just been inspected, things that shouldn't have failed. And then a call from my bank, asking if I'd authorized a series of refund requests and canceled payments from one of my business accounts. I hadn't, which led me to check the internal admin software we used for building operations, which led me to see who had logged in remotely, which led me to one very unexpected email address, an old family email address, one Dad used to have when he helped Mason set up a small investment site years ago. Somehow, some way, he had gotten into my business systems, accessed enough to sabotage the operations. And when I traced the IP, there was no mistake. It came from my parents' house. And that's when the story really changed. I didn't sleep the night I confirmed the sabotage came from my parents' house. I just sat there in the dark, staring at my laptop, the pale glow of the screen painting the walls with a cold, sterile light. The email address, the IP trace, the system logs, it was all right there. My father had not only disrespected me for years, not only belittled every choice I'd made, but now he'd actively tried to ruin what I built. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I went back and forth with myself. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was Mason. Maybe the IP was spoofed. Maybe someone else used the network. I was grasping at anything that would let me avoid the truth. But deep down, I knew. It made too much sense. The timing, the precision, the way everything had hit at once, like dominoes falling. My father didn't understand much about modern systems, but he wasn't dumb. He was a man who'd once managed an entire department, ran audits, handled accounts. He knew how to mess with logistics. He'd just never used that knowledge against me before. Until now. I tried to confront it rationally. I took screenshots. I documented the timestamps. I pulled security camera footage from the offices to show who hadn't been there when the maintenance requests were logged or accounts accessed. I built a quiet case, not for a lawsuit, at least not yet, but for myself, to confirm that I wasn't imagining things, that the betrayal was real. But even knowing the facts didn't make it hurt less. I was hollow for weeks, went through the motions, nodded through meetings, signed papers without reading them twice. My assistant, Lila, noticed first. She kept asking if I was okay, offering to take things off my plate, but I just told her I was tired. She didn't press. She was good like that. Knew how to give space without leaving me alone. The real blow didn't come from the sabotage itself. It came when I finally drove to my parents' house and walked in unannounced. Mom was in the kitchen, frosting cupcakes, like it was any other Tuesday. She blinked at me, surprised, but smiled. "Caleb, sweetie, you didn't say you were stopping by. Want coffee?" "Where's Dad?" I asked flatly. Her smile faded. He's in the garage." "What?" I didn't answer. I just walked past her, through the living room, past the old pictures of Mason's graduation and Leah's wedding, There were no pictures of me on the walls. When I opened the garage door, he was sitting at the workbench, sorting through a box of old tools like he was waiting for someone to need him. He looked up, startled, and his face stiffened. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. I held up the folder I'd brought with me. Inside were the printouts of the logs, the traces, the screenshots. I handed them to him in silence. He took one look and scoffed. "You came all the way here for this?" he asked. I waited. He set the papers down on the bench, like they bored him. "So what if I looked into your little business? Thought maybe if you were serious about growing, you could use some structure. Your systems are a mess, Caleb. You're running it like a janitor." My mouth went dry. "You accessed my accounts. You triggered false work orders. You tried to tank client confidence." He shrugged. "I was testing your setup. You're the one who's always so sensitive." I stared at him, disbelief flooding every cell in my body. "You really think this is your version of help? I think you've spent too long thinking small. I thought if you saw where the cracks were, you'd wake up and finally let someone with experience help you run things." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so insane, so self-righteous. That laughter was the only thing between me and screaming. "You didn't help. You sabotaged. You humiliated me in front of the family. And now you break into my systems, and you call it help. I built a career from scratch, Caleb," he snapped. "I know how to run an operation. You just lucked into some property and suddenly think you're a mogul." "Lucked into?" I whispered. He stood up, towering over the bench now, his eyes flashing. "You're not special, son. You're just bitter because your brother passed you by. You always have been." I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I just turned around, walked out of the house, got in my car, and drove away. That was the last time I spoke to my father face-to-face for almost 2 years. I wish I could say I bounced back quickly, that I channeled my rage into fuel and built an empire. But that's not what happened. For the first time since I was 17, I seriously considered quitting, selling the buildings, walking away, finding something quieter, smaller, something that wouldn't make me a target in my own family, something that wouldn't make me question every choice I'd ever made. But I didn't. Because 2 weeks after that confrontation, one of my longest tenured tenants, a pediatric clinic, called me personally. The HVAC unit we thought had been wrecked by the sabotage, I'd paid to replace it quickly. No drama, no delays, just did the job. And the clinic director wanted me to know how much she appreciated it. "You're one of the best building owners we've worked with," she told me. "The last guy ignored everything. You're always present. You care." And something about that stuck with me. I cared, even when no one else did. Even when my family mocked me, ignored me, tried to tear me down, I cared. About my work, about my tenants, about the spaces I was building and maintaining. That meant something. I poured myself into the business. Not with anger, with intention. I upgraded security systems, hired an IT consultant to review every vulnerability. I rebuilt the backend with layered permissions and two-factor authentication, updated the tenant portal, and created new SOPs for maintenance teams. I cleaned house, top to bottom. Then I expanded, bought a 4th property, then a 5th, opened a co-working space in an abandoned mid-rise, hired a small team of local contractors full-time, gave them benefits, holiday pay, and real respect, something most landlords never even considered. I didn't just want to grow. I wanted to build something that didn't rely on smoke and mirrors. Something real. I started mentoring a few young people too, mostly folks like me, who worked night shifts and saved pennies, trying to figure out how to climb. I didn't broadcast it, but I made space for them, answered emails, took calls, showed them what I'd learned the hard way. And slowly, quietly, the weight started to lift. I stopped checking my family's social media, stopped comparing my milestones to Mason's vacations or Leah's curated perfect life. I unfollowed them, muted the group chats, and carved out a life that made sense to me. The buildings became more than just real estate. They became symbols of what I'd survived, what I'd outgrown. And every lease signed, every tenant retained, every system improved. It all felt like reclaiming a little more of myself. But the past has a way of circling back. And 2 winters later, it did. That morning, I came in early. The sky was gray, soft flurries falling outside the large glass windows of the downtown office building I'd bought 6 months earlier. The coffee machine sputtered to life in the break room. I was reviewing new leasing agreements when Lila poked her head in. "Hey," she said, hesitant. "There's someone outside. Said he's here about a job." I looked up, confused. A walk-in. She nodded. But, Caleb, it's your father. I froze. Then stood, walked to the lobby windows. And there he was. Same man. Same cold smirk softened by years of wear. Holding a folder, standing in the snow like he didn't have anywhere else to go. He'd returned. But this time, he wasn't there to gloat. He was there to ask for something. And I hadn't yet decided if I was going to give it to him. I didn't go out to greet him right away. Instead, I stood there behind the tinted glass, arms crossed, watching my father shift his weight from one foot to the other as snow began to collect on his shoulders. He looked smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of him. Not just older, diminished. The confident, commanding man who used to toast over turkey and belittle me with a smile was now just cold. Waiting. Hoping. And yet, I felt nothing. No satisfaction. No anger. No urge to gloat. Just a strange, heavy stillness, like the silence before a storm you already know is coming. I turned to Lila. Don't let him in yet. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? Yeah. Let him wait a bit. She gave a slow nod and walked off, heels clicking softly on the polished floor. I went back to my office, closed the door, sat behind my desk, and let my mind work. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The years of snide remarks. The public humiliation. The sabotage he'd tried to frame as help. And now, here he was, jobless, desperate, standing outside the building I owned, looking for a way back into something he had no hand in building. The irony was almost too perfect. But I wasn't interested in petty revenge. Not anymore. I wanted something that would last, a message he couldn't ignore, a lesson he couldn't twist into pride. So I started planning. The first thing I did was pull up the folder I kept labeled contingencies. It was where I stored documentation of the sabotage, everything I'd quietly gathered and filed away after our last encounter. Back then, I didn't know if I'd ever need it. But something in me couldn't let it go. And now? Now it felt like a loaded chamber waiting for a trigger. I printed a few choice pages, IP logs, system access, timestamps. Not everything. Just enough to remind him I hadn't forgotten. Next, I called my lawyer, Sam. He was sharp, discreet, and had been on retainer since the second building. Hey, I said. Hypothetical question for you. Let's say someone with a history of hostility towards you showed up looking for work. Someone who had previously accessed your business systems without permission. Could you legally hire them, and also use that contact to secure protections in case they ever tried something again? There was a pause. Hypothetically, Sam asked. Hypothetically, you could, but you'd want an airtight contract. Boundaries. NDA. Limited access. Monitoring. Might even be worth it to create a role just for that. Nothing essential, but enough to keep them close. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Got it. Thanks, Sam. Caleb, he added, voice low. You sure about this? No, but I'm not planning to offer him a job. I'm planning to offer him a mirror. After the call, I reached out to Lila. Bring him in. She hesitated. Want me to sit in? No, this one's mine. I stood as the door opened and my father stepped inside. He looked around, taking in the office. The dark wood paneling. The subtle, modern furniture. The framed certificate on the wall, my LLC's registration. He lingered on it a moment longer than necessary. Then our eyes met. Caleb, he said, voice scratchy. Thanks for seeing me. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He did. There was a long pause, heavy with everything unspoken. He cleared his throat. I know this is unexpected, but I figured I'd try. Things have been hard lately. I said nothing. I know I haven't always been the most supportive, but I'm looking for something stable now. Thought maybe, if you had something. I let the silence stretch until it bordered on cruelty. Then I opened the folder and slid it across the desk. He looked at it, then back at me. I remember this, he said softly. So you kept it? I nodded. I keep a lot of things. He didn't open it. Just rested his hands on top. I was wrong, he admitted. About a lot. I wanted to believe you were still figuring things out. That I still had time to teach you something. But I see now, you built this without me. You don't need my help. No, I said calmly. I don't. He swallowed hard. But you came here anyway. He nodded. I don't have anything open that fits your background. I continued. And frankly, you're a liability. I can't risk another breach. His face tightened. But, I said, I can offer you something. His eyes lifted. I have a new division. Property inspections. Nothing glamorous. Just routine checks. Plumbing. HVAC, structural walkthroughs, field work, clipboards, reports, entry-level stuff, contract only, no admin access, no systems, no keys. His face fell just slightly. Sound beneath you? He shook his head slowly. No, not anymore. I leaned forward. If I bring you on, it's with full monitoring. Weekly check-ins, random reviews. Any deviation from the route, any missed appointment, and you're out. He nodded again, smaller this time. And you sign a statement acknowledging your past interference and agreeing to cease all access attempts or communications related to my internal systems. Permanently. I pulled out the pre-drafted agreement from Sam and slid it over. He took it, read a few lines, then looked up. You already had this ready? I knew you'd come eventually, I said. I just didn't know when. He looked down again, then signed. When he handed it back, I didn't smile, didn't shake his hand. I simply stood. Lila will give you your schedule. You start Monday. He rose too, eyes searching mine for something, gratitude, maybe, forgiveness. But I wasn't offering that. Not yet. As he turned to leave, I added, one more thing. He looked back. This doesn't change the past. You may be working under me now, but don't mistake that for acceptance. He nodded slowly, then walked out. I sat back down, heart pounding, not with anger, but with a strange, calm clarity. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. But it wasn't over yet. Because I wasn't just planning to keep him close. I was going to show him, day by day, building by building, exactly what I had built, what he dismissed, what he tried to break, and what could never be taken from me again. I didn't want an apology. I wanted him to see the truth and live with it. Every single day. He showed up on time that first Monday. Gray jacket, stiff posture, the folder I'd given him tucked under his arm like a schoolboy's homework. Lila handed him the checklist, explained the system, showed him how to scan QR codes posted in each mechanical room and maintenance corridor to verify that he'd completed his inspections. He didn't say much that day, just nodded, listened, wrote everything down. It was strange, seeing him like that, subdued, compliant, quiet. Not once did he comment on the office layout. Not once did he suggest improvements. The man who once dominated every room with his presence now barely made a sound. But I knew him too well. That silence wasn't humility. It was shame. And the real revenge? That came slowly. Every building he was assigned to, every clipboard he carried, was a reminder that he didn't own the empire. He was a part-time field tech on a probationary contract. He was no longer the voice at the head of the table. He was the man who reported to his son. The man who once made a Thanksgiving toast mocking janitors was now, by every stretch of the imagination, doing janitor-level work, and under strict surveillance at that. The system I put in place didn't leave room for excuses. Every entry point had a camera. Every QR scan recorded a timestamp. Every tenant could leave feedback. And I made sure his schedule included the very building he once drove past and mocked me for, that dump downtown, he used to call it. The one I had flipped into a co-working hub now full of freelancers, startups, and 2 local newsrooms. A building where, once a week, he now had to check the boiler room, wipe dust off the ceiling grates, and log airflow reports. I never humiliated him in public. I never raised my voice. I didn't have to. I let the silence speak. I let routine be the punishment, the new normal. But the real fallout, the one that cracked his pride into pieces, came from the rest of the family. Because I didn't just stop at hiring him. I updated my will. I made a donation to the private school Leah's kids attended, under my company's name. And I offered Mason's firm a property management contract for one of my satellite buildings on the outskirts of town. When the paperwork came in, he read the owner's name and called me immediately. Wait, you own this place? He asked. Since last quarter, I replied. He paused. Why offer me the contract? Because I believe in giving people opportunities, I said, with a calm he couldn't argue with. You're trying to make a point. No, I said. You made the point for me years ago. I'm just letting it echo. He didn't respond after that. But over the next few months, word spread, quietly, subtly. The family group chats got quieter. The holidays became more awkward. Nobody toasted anything anymore. And at the next Thanksgiving, for the first time in over a decade, I hosted dinner. Not because I missed the noise, or the rituals, or the empty compliments, but because I wanted to change the story. The table was long, set with dark green napkins and gold-accented plates. Lila helped organize the caterer. A few of my close friends came, along with their families. Mason showed up alone. His wife had a thing. Leah came late, dragging her husband and kids, eyeing the place like she was casing it for comparison. Dad arrived last. He didn't knock. He just stood outside until someone opened the door. When he walked in, I noticed something had changed. Not in his face, not in his voice, but in the way he didn't look at anything. Not the chandelier, not the art, not the velvet curtains. It was like he'd trained himself to avoid measuring, avoid reacting, avoid being seen seeing. I let the room settle before I stood at the head of the table. Everyone turned to me, and I raised my glass. To old roles, I said. The ones we outgrow. A few chuckled. Some looked uncomfortable. Dad said nothing. I continued. To new beginnings. Earned, not handed. Leah looked down at her plate. Mason cleared his throat. To the people who build quietly, I added. To the ones who were underestimated. Dismissed. Ignored. Now the silence was thick. And to the ones who learn, sometimes too late, who the real builders were all along. I clinked my glass gently against the one in front of me, then took a sip. Nobody said a word. After dinner, while the others made polite conversation or hovered around the dessert table, Dad stepped out onto the back patio. I followed. He didn't look at me. I don't know what you want from me, he said quietly. I come to work. I don't complain. I stay out of your way. I don't want anything, I replied. Not from you. He looked down at his hands. They were shaking slightly. I'd never seen them do that before. I'm sorry, he said. Not loud. Not rehearsed. Not even fully formed. But it was real. And I nodded. Okay. We stood there for a while, just breathing in the cold air. He didn't ask for more. I didn't offer. But when he came to work that Monday, he was 15 minutes early. And he stayed late. Months passed. Then a year. His contract ended, but I extended it. Slightly better pay, same role. He never asked for more. Never overstepped. Something in him had settled. Not submission exactly. Just reality. And over time, the tension eased. We never became close. Never had long father-son talks or played catch-up. But one day, I saw him pause in the lobby of one of my buildings, look up at the company logo on the wall, and nod to himself. It was barely a gesture, but it was enough. He knew. And the final piece of revenge was that I no longer needed it. The power he held over me for decades, his approval, his recognition, his validation, was gone. I had taken it back. Not by force, but by becoming undeniable. My revenge wasn't in making him suffer. It was in making him see. And he did. Every single day. Until the end. And the last words he ever spoke to me were these. You built something I couldn't even imagine.